Hey everybody, this is Sam Butler on the newest OOcast experience, and we're all here today to discuss the topic of ethics and ethos on peer-to-peer by emerging regenerative perspectives. And as Vinicius has pointed out, and some of the others we'll talk about today, this whole aspect of ethics has not really been explored given, or I should say, in a moment when so much attention is going towards regeneration. So it'll be a really interesting conversation. Personally, my name is Sam Butler. I'm calling in currently from Croatia, a little bit outside Zagreb. I hail from the Washington, D.C. area in the United States, and I do a lot of work focused on environmental and social outcomes, generally in the digital space, spanning stories and experiences and code and design. And from there, I would pass on the baton.
Yeah, thanks, Sam. So my name is Tiberius, and in this OOcast experience, I'll play the role of co-host. So I'm going to facilitate and help a little bit Sam, who is going to animate this discussion between one of my friends and collaborators, Maisam Dabu, and Vinicius, who I consider that have some knowledge, some very important knowledge and experience with the topic. So I brought in Maisam for this conversation because he is doing some work within our environment, our network Sensorica, and we're exploring the ethos and ethical considerations within our organization. So for me, he's Sensorica specialist in ethics. So I brought him here for this discussion. And I'm from Montreal, Canada. And I'll pass the baton to Maisam to present himself.
Thank you very much, Tibi, for this beautiful introduction. Maisam Daboul, I'm Lebanese, but I was born and raised in Nigeria. Lebanese, we have a huge diaspora. We're known for that, and we're very proud of that. I'm a researcher, ethical economy. I have a doctorate in business administration, and my thesis was, can we offer common-based peer production as a new ethical economic model? As my colleagues Sam and Tibi mentioned, it is a very unexplored territory. I am very much looking forward for this conversation. I'm very happy to be with you guys, and I'm very happy to pass the baton next to Vinny. He's the guy I'm looking forward to have this deep discussion, and looking forward for your inputs, Tibi and Sam. So thank you very much.
Hey, my name is Vinicius. You can call me Vinny. It's a pleasure to be here in various ways, because not only because I feel that I'm in between, I'm within friends, right? Not only peer-to-peer or commons, paradigm friends, but friends, really friends, people that I like. And it's going to be a real, let's say, it's going to be a type of a moonshot that we're going to do here, because this is very new territory. We're going to explore ethos and ethics about related to the regenerative movement and the peer-to-peer. Both movements should be intertwined, but they aren't. So it's going to be nice to have to understand how they can be intertwined. And I'm born in Brazil, in Rio de Janeiro. Folks think that I'm a carioca or I'm a Brazilian, but I'm an earthling, right? I was born in this planet, so that's it. So feel free. Here we are. Sam?
Yeah. So, as a way to begin for anybody who's listening, I thought it might be helpful to kind of ground in some initial, maybe understanding and maybe some examples for some of the big concepts involved. So, that includes regenerative perspectives, that includes kind of peer to peer and commons based peer production, what that means, and then how ethics specifically fits into this conversation, given everything that's going on with those subjects. So if anybody wants to share some examples of any of those terms and concepts to kind of help ground the conversation.
Well,
I think that Mason is the guy, isn't it, Mason?
well, I would like to start with no matter how much we approach, as we all know to a certain extent, ethics, whether we approach it from an economic perspective, social, cultural, business ethics, and we all know about the word of social corporate responsibility, we see this deep relation at the end of the day, at the deepest layer between ethics and who we are as humans. So the main question for me would be, how can we build something that is more ethical without trying to affect the human behavior? And the answer would be nearly impossible. So when approaching economic models and ethics, what we try to focus on is the following. The fields of sociology and anthropology have clearly shown us that the economic model we live in affects our behavior as humans. So the question that I would like to relay on you guys, can we build or can we see a certain phenomena that is growing before us and try to foster it and probably create an economic model from it that pushes us to behave in the best way possible? So what do you think?
Yeah, I would start, if I may, saying that if we as a species turn out that the economic models that we created during the time that we became a sedentary species, not a nomad one, and we create civilizations, right? So when we became sedentary, we go to that we shift from being observed by other species, by nature, to observer, right? So when we shift the position to observe all things around, we start observing things around not like relational objects or relational things. As nomads, we had a relation with everything we were doing as a species, right? This is not something that I'm pulling out of my head, right? You have this in anthropological research. You have that in archaeological research. So, and the most visible thing is that is the techniques, the technology, right? And we already had, as nomads, a way to create technology or to hunt or to gather whatever. But when we shift from the condition of being observed to observe, like observe the skies, the moon, the stars, observe the woods, observe our surroundings, right? We shift our perception of reality. And when we shift the perception of reality, we tend to let's say, to pick up all the things around, like trees, like rocks, and like it was some object that would be most profound, most important, most relevant to establish a sedentary life, right? So that's the birth, in my understanding, Mason, of the economic models, right? That's really the birth of the economic model. So it was a shift in perception of our surroundings, right? and we start to treat not only the nature as a whole, but animals as something that we can domesticate it, something that we can use to sustain our beingness, to sustain our life, let's say, our sedentary lives. So in this sense, of course I agree with you, but let's think this way. If we can shift, we can reverse it and shift, make a reversal of it, and think that if we shift from not building another economic model that will, let's say, influence our behavior, but we shift behavior to simply change or to resignify the actual economic models, would be a more interesting move to make. See, because we're not being captured from the same paradigm perspective that I just shared. I don't know if you agree with me, but that's my take on it.
Oh, your insights, they always open up new windows. The first point I would like to comment on, which was your approach to how we moved from being observed to the observers, and what I would like to point is we can do both. I do not feel the problem is that we shifted to observing as much as we shifted to trying to control what we observe. Because the act of observation in its essence is, as you know, the first step into science. For me to understand anything, whether it exists or whether I want to build something, and well, more specifically, when something exists, I need to observe it. Now, what I would build on what you said is the following. The question is, how did we start to observe as humans? We stopped observing with openness, with love, with continuity. We stopped observing in a sense of synergy, and we started observing because we wanted to control what we were observing. So in the first point, I would like to say that we can and we should shift to the observation. We should be very careful how to do that observation. Now, on the second point you said, which is very important, that we should approach human behavior to change, to adapt to a certain economy. This is where spiritualities and God and religions try to approach. How can we shift human behaviors? And it's almost impossible, you know. But what we can do, since we have the knowledge, Vinny, that economies affect our behavior. Again, and I agree strongly with you on this point, and I would assert it every time that we meet at this point, is that we are not required to build anything. The common base peer production to peer is a natural phenomenon that grew without any planning, without any structure. Our evolution as species got to a point, it was inevitable. We just happened to live at the age that it happened. It was coming. Humans are going to connect at a much deeper level. What we want to try to research economically is, what is this beautiful thing that is growing? How is it growing? What are the elements that might hinder it? And what are the elements that might help it grow? But I know this is where we step into your fear, which I also agree with you, that researchers observing this phenomenon tend to easily slip from the act of observation to the act of controlling, and that is where hopefully we will be able to draw the line to a certain extent.
So on the topic of commons-based peer production as something that's emerging and as a more recent or modern phenomenon, something that's been going on my mind is wondering actually if a similar model of organizing, so again, not so divided amongst silos and organizations or corporations, but people with access to each other, generally working on things together, which will serve a common good. Part of me wonders if that's actually a very old process, which then became, let's say, interrupted or impeded by some more modern developments. For example, John Locke's theory on property rights, and the transition from, granted, a more centralized ownership of land and distribution, but moving land more from stewardship to individual plots and properties. That brings up a lot of questions, of course, but the main thing I wanted to ask is commons-based peer production rooted, or can it clearly be tied back to a much older method of organizing, or for any reasons, is it genuinely a new and modern phenomena?
I have a lot of things to say about that, but I think that TB would like to say something. I'm just hinting.
Yes, well, that's a nice question, because essentially this is what I saw when I first met Vidi. So before we started to record, I already told this story about Vinny's experience sitting under the tree in a village and having this interaction with strangers, and looking at it from his understanding of peer-to-peer. These people didn't know about commons-based peer production. They haven't read books, about this new phenomena. So yeah, I do see that this has deep roots in humans. I don't know how he has expressed itself during period of nomadism or period of where people got more locked in societies and became sedentary. But there is definitely an expression of these peer-to-peer dynamics that comes with its own ethos, like any other set of human interactions. From your perspective, Vinny, when you were interacting with these strangers, and you were seeing that as a pure peer-to-peer interaction, and analyzing that, how do you see these type of relationships and interactions and ethos rooted, in our human nature? Like, there's got to be some soil there that nourishes this, and it should be part of our nature. But my opinion is that it's just expressed today, or maybe not as suppressed as before, or expressed because there are some new incentives or some new possibilities, right?
Yeah, I think that we can approach this beautiful question that Sam made in various ways, but I will try to simplify it so we don't have the time to explore, to make a deep dive in this. But let's say that there's a huge difference between interaction and participation, right? And what I'm saying is that interaction is a real natural phenomenon, right? Wherever you look in nature, everything is interacting with everything, right? Everything is interacting in multiple dimensions and with multiple settings and contexts. Everything is interacting. So we obviously belong to nature, right? We belong to nature. We have this capability to interact in various ways too, in a multidimensional way. Actually, we do, right? We do this, but we don't have, let's say, the awareness of it, right? Because we privilege language and we privilege rationality, right? But the only natural phenomenon that we see nowadays, we see between us that can break, let's say, this inertia state of only not, let's say, limited interaction through language, is really open yourself to hear the sounds, to feel the breeze, right, and to hear your body, right, and to feel the warmth of someone by your side, right? This is I'm talking here about something that is very profound and is very interactive. So when I was in the village, sitting there in the plaza, looking at a tree or the birds. I was doing a type of bird watching, just looking at it. Folks were very, let's say, they were very interesting what this guy is doing there, right? And they were moved by the curiosity, so they came along. Wait just a second, please. Wait just a second. I have a. Please, Mason, continue. I have a little problem here. I will come in. Okay.
So, we see here there, like Tibi was saying, and there's the human perspective, and there's to what extent we have to do this logical intrusion of this human perspective that Fini was explaining. And to go back to Sam's question, I've really never thought of it before, Sam, and I love that I heard it now from you. It obviously is an expression of something much deeper, but the point where I'm stuck, Sam, is if we know it at a very deep level as humans, and I know we do, why did it take us so much time to realize it? And there's now these two levels of learning. I believe first you learn something with your mind. I know, for example, I should stop smoking, but I am not stopping it because deeply, at a much deeper level, I know I don't want to. So this is the question. If we know something in our logic, is it truly enough? I don't think so. So yeah, Vinny's back.
Yes, I was trying to make the point, the difference between participation and interaction. So interaction is something that always impermanent, always, it needs a pair, it needs a peer, let's say a peer-to-peer thing happening, right? It doesn't need to be between the same beings of our species. It can be with other animals, it can be with a plant, but you see, when we interact, we change ourselves, right? So when I was there sitting, looking at the tree, seeing the birds and things like that, people became curious and came to me. But they came to me not with, let's say, armed with some speech or to reprimand or things like that. They were just curious. So the curiosity is a powerful, empathic let's say, thing that we have as a species, right? So they start talking with me, but they start talking in a very interactive mode, dialogos mode, right? Dialogue mode. So we were interchanging impressions. As Sam says, we were accessing each other. When we access each other, really, we don't only monologue. Let's say if we go to we go to some place that you only let me say, when you go to a townhouse, a townhouse in a city, and you have to make your voice. So that session, let's say, is all pre-designed, right? You have a time that you were able to speak, were able to talk, you were able to vote. So this is what I call participation. This is very low frequency interaction. Very low frequency interaction. So when we pitch up the very high frequency interaction, when we pitch it up, you open yourself to be accessible. So when I was just sitting there, just having this profound interaction conversations, I could map out all the cities, all the village, all the people in turn the village, what they are doing in their daily basis without asking them directly, right? Because they just shared. So there comes the future of sharing, right? So they share. Because this is natural for us. We share. We are aggregated beings. We share, right? So that was very profound for me because I didn't ask anything where you live, what you do. No, I was just interacting and having some conversation, and folks were just dropping, just sharing. Well, I do this, I do this. I know the guy there that does this, this. And I begin to construct a mental map, right? I used to say, I said that to Mason, like a type of a hypha and a type of mycelium network, right? It's a type of mycelium network of the relationships that was occurring in that space, in that village. So this shocked me, and I was profoundly moved by it, because I was thinking, wow, there's something wrong about all the peer-to-peer, not the peer-to-peer paradigm, but the commons movement, I was thinking in that time. What is wrong about it? Wrong is that people are thinking in a very participational mode, right? In a very negotiational mode, in a very platformical mode, in a very contractual mode. Where is this emerging phenomenon of the interaction, right? This natural phenomenon of the interaction. Where is the openness? Where is the empathy? So I started to understand that we are missing our complexity. We are missing the complexity that is already built in us. And we are missing how the complexity can really sustain and emerge, let's say, frameworks to do all sorts of things. So we don't need to pre-organize everything. We don't need to pre-design everything. We don't need to pre-plan everything. We can just, by interaction, get to know things. And by interaction, we can really lay out in between us temporary, let's say, frameworks to work whatever we want to work with, these frameworks, right? So that was the aha moment that I had with this research that I done through various cities. So I don't know if I made myself clear, but the thing is that I start talking about not the systems making thing, right? Let's systematize this. This is a system thinking thing. I start complexity doing thing. I start to understand that the most disruptive move that we can do, and the most ancient one that we can do, because it relates to the time that we were nomads, is the complexity doing move, right? Let's do this complexity doing move together. So I start making not only research, but I start to net weaving, right? I start net weaving this type of thing between people, and I was astounded, like a lot of things emerges. So Mason, and it emerges in a so profound way, like without any type of structure, any type of organizational structures, right? Any type of planning, any type of, let's say, agreements or I don't know, policies or regulations or things like that. So that's it. I'd love to have your feedback, Mason, on this.
I understand the main point that we are built to interact. We are built to deeply, at a very deep level, we have that capability to interact at a very deep level and connect to this very essential and natural form you're talking about. The question I'm having, should we assume that we can know how to do that? I don't think so. There is a process of growing for us to probably reach to that highest form, because I feel this is a certain sense of interaction that, although inherent, requires deep learning stages, requires the understanding of pain, of the cycle and death and life, and in order to understand those, we have to fall into the act of structuring. The act of structuring, failing it, and trying all over again is the way we get to that realization. So trying to remove that act for me would make what you are explaining and what we should aim for in a very high state very hard. Because now what you're explaining is expecting people to behave in a very deep and very human and spiritual way. But when I would ask you, well, how do I get there? Well, it's through mistakes. It's through trying to plan and my plan failing, and then maybe learning over time, maybe I shouldn't plan this much. Maybe I shouldn't try to control the elements of my life. Maybe I should trust the moment at the setting. The act of structuring allows us to grow and better understand how to observe things in front of us.
Yeah, I understand totally what you said, because we're totally captured by the way that are the ethos, right? The society as we are, right? We're totally captured by it. And but you see, Mason, there's something. I would substitute the word structuring from nurturing, right? I would substitute that, because we don't really need to structure anything to grow, or to even to let's say amplify.
And I would completely agree on that.
Yes, amplify your awareness, right? Your awareness about it. But let me put in this way: we actually don't need to go there in the sense that you put it, because we're living a very complex civilizational collapse, right? And people are very exhausted by it. We are, not only because of the pandemic, because we are very exhausted. We are very exhausted. There are people that they understand that the actual frameworks that we structure as societies, with institutions, with agents, with all types of mediations and representations and things like that, right? Big structures, very complicated one, not complex, because there's a difference between complicated and complex, right? Very complicated one. They just don't do the job. They just can't deal with all the type of complexity that we're living in these times, where everything is falling around, right? Everything is collapsing. And that's why we're in this very deep meaning crisis that we were allowed, because we exhausted everything. We accumulated everything. And that's why I think that we are in this liminal space, and liminal stage, let's say, and that people is more suitable and open to really be accessible and to really start interacting in a very, let's say, true way, right? In a very true way. Well, that's my feeling. That's my gut feeling. That's my, of course, it's related upon my experience, the decades of experience. But that's why I feel when I go to the favelas here in Rio. That's how I feel when I go to little cities in Brazil. That's how I feel when I interact with people all over the planet. They're very exhausted. I don't know. I don't know if you guys feel what I'm feeling, but yeah. And that sense, we don't need to structure more. You see, Mason, we can reverse it, engineer it. We have to destructure it. Destructure it. We don't need a structure. We have to destructure, because we already done a lot of structuring, right? Remember when we talk about the layering of first civilization, second civilization, third civilization, fourth? We already built cities upon cities upon cities upon cities. We already accumulated a lot. We have to destructure. If the 20th century was the century of the engineering, the 21st century is the century of the destructuring this engineering, to see that how simple we can become in between us and with nature, right? So that's my take on it. But that's my take, okay, guys? So feel free.
It's very, very interesting, because in reality we can't have a paradigm shift if people agree with our thesis here, which I think we share, that we are going through a paradigm shift. New structures cannot emerge within very stiff and complicated structures. So somehow the old structure has to crumble down in order to give space for the new structure to emerge and be developed. But notice that I said new structure, and I have this belief that minimal structure is good for emergence, for change, but structure is good for consolidation and production. So when we see these big shifts in society, you always see a collapse of the order that kept things in check, and then in that void, there is a lot of emergence, experimentation, and at some point a new type of structure settles in, and then it goes through a consolidation phase where that structure becomes more and more sophisticated, and at some point becomes overwhelming, and then stiffens society and puts it on a track for another disaster and renewal. Right? That's how I see it. So I think structure is kind of needed somewhere. But going back to ethos and ethics, I think the minimal thing that I can bring here about ethics is libertarianism, that have one simple basic principle, which is never initiate violence on somebody else, and it's such a simple libertarianism is an ethics system. It's not an economic system, but you can derive an economic system that is compatible with the libertarian ethics. But I find it so elegant because it is so simple. You know what I'm saying? So you can essentially take all the norms that we have created, cities up and cities up and cities up and cities, that now it requires people with PhDs to understand all the code that we have written for being able to live together. So that is a very, very basic principle. I wonder how this applies to your experience, like human experience, Vinny, and obviously, it's too simplistic to be able to. It's too simplistic to be able to function today. So you always need to add stuff on top. But I wonder if you destructure, de-engineer, make everything, take out all this code that we have written for our society. I wonder if that would be the only énoncé, the only thing that you can hang on. Because when you're under the tree, what stops somebody from coming and smashing you in the head? You see what I'm saying? I wonder if there is one thing that we should hold on, and maybe libertarianism has put the finger in it, or maybe not.
Yeah, I think.
Can we even take out this principle?
Yeah, I think. I think Sam wants to say something, but just a sec, Sam. In the sense is, if we want to make the move of this Anthropocene, these final stages of the Anthropocene era that we encounter ourselves, that is not even human-centric, it's object-centric, right? Because we turn out in a very rational mode, we turn everything object, even us, we turn ourselves a product and an object. So if we want to make a move, this is in a regenerative perspective, right? We want to make a move for life-centric models or life-centric perspectives. This deconstruction, it makes a lot of sense. I don't know if you guys agree with me, but of course, what type of structuring would we will do in a life-centric perspective? Life-centric perspective. This planet, this is something that I don't hear very much all over. What type of structuring would be this? Some folks can come and say, well, there'd be a symbiotic one. But what is a symbiotic structuring thing, right? Well, it would be a stigmergy one. Well, what is this in the practice? So we don't know, right? This is a very, and the next thing that I would add, TB, is that we exhaust ourselves in building in the territorial and local perspective, right? Territorial and local perspective. We exhaust ourselves. We made up a very huge machinery of hyper-consumerist macroeconomic machinery in the global perspective, like throughout with the ultramarine expansion by Europe 800 years ago, 600, 700 years ago. So now, what is the horizon that we can rely on to, let's say, make new symbiotic structures or stigmatic structures? I will argue that is the global one, is the hyper-localized one that connects with the planetary one, right? When we have a direct, like an umbilical connection. We have a direct connection in a symbiotic way with the nature, with the planet, and in a very hyper-local, not only perspective, but hyper-local way of living. And I'm saying that it's a sedentary one. It can be a nomad one. But what I'm saying is, if we're talking about new structures and the ethos and the ethics of these new structures, we really don't have a clue about it. We really don't have. This is a very this is a very new thing for us. We are really in a time and space as a species in something that is very new. And what is ironic and it's paradoxical is that we deplenish the planet, right? We as a species, we really, like a plague, we deplenish the planet, and we now inaugurating a space age, right? We now want to deplenish the planet that is already deplenished, that is Mars, right? What are we going to build in Mars? So, or in the moon that is already replenished. So everything is very complex and paradoxical in this sense. But that's it. That's my 2 cents that I want to add for what you just said, TB. And please, Sam, forgive me.
No, all good. Thank you so much, Vinny. TB, in response to the discussion around libertarianism and kind of the single rule of don't harm others, I appreciate what the simplicity of such a system can kind of afford and how it helps make decisions. I also think it's too simple in some ways, so it really doesn't address some of the complexities of modern interaction. For example, think about another sentient non-human being, or things that we understand to have high levels of consciousness, species like whales or like octopuses, or even, potentially like pigs and things we're starting to see, to eat something like that, to kill and eat something like that, is that creating harm? What are the ethics surrounding it? And I actually wanted to bring in a branch of kind of reasoning around this from Peter Singer, who kind of shared a philosophy, and this is rooted in ethics, around this idea. So his approach was to say this: any idea of ethics, which is also conflated with things that could be in our own evolutionary benefit, so to kind of eat, to survive, to propagate, we kind of have a mixed influence there, because it's hard to pick out what seems like a stronger ethical foundation and what is in our best kind of evolutionary sense or our evolutionary memes or genes to kind of believe as part of our culture. So he takes an approach where he kind of goes away from the individual person, and he eventually takes this, you can find this by Googling this, by thinking about the perspective of the universe. So if you think about kind of this world that we're on, 7 billion people, and you think about what is ethics, and you're thinking from kind of each of us in these individual bodies, but then going above that and now looking at a world that includes 7 billion people, and there's no preference for any one of those 7 billion people, and billions and trillions of organisms and species, and there's not really kind of a preference for any of those species, whether they're humans or otherwise. And you go even further and further and further. And so just imagine you're seeing from the perspective of the universe. You don't have a preference for any single human being. You probably don't have a preference for humans in general, as opposed to any other species. And so then the way the argument goes is something like this. You can kind of think in terms of ethics, what is most important is probably pleasurable experiences and a lack of suffering. And the more conscious and the more sentient an organism is, the kind of greater bandwidth of pleasure and suffering that it can experience. And so I don't mean to misrepresent Peter Singer's arguments. This is kind of some of my reflections on this. You can kind of take that to a point where ethics can be grounded in an idea of, if you're making decisions which improve the experience and lessen the suffering of things which have more consciousness, and are kind of attuned to that spectrum, then it can be in a pretty good place of making life better for you without harming others. And of course, where this kind of gets complicated, and the other thing I wanted to say about libertarianism is thinking about future states as well. So another simple philosophy, kind of a simple set of rules, and I don't mean to misrepresent this either, but from some indigenous cultures, is this idea of 7-generation philosophies. There's different takes on this, so I don't want to misrepresent it. But there is a very simple rule about thinking into the future and thinking about how our actions today impact those to come. Because very realistic in a very grounded way, if I as an individual take a plane flight today, which produces so much carbon in the atmosphere, in 100 years, in 200 years, that could directly be harming somebody through the air that they're not able to breathe or through other conditions that they have. So to kind of pull that comment back in terms of ethics, I think Peter Singer's perspective is very relevant here in terms of, thinking about the consciousness and the conscious experience of different organisms as we approach what is ethical, and kind of thinking from that universal perspective about maybe what the universe would want to see without any specific preference or favoritism towards any individuals or any species. And also with that and with other philosophies, the time dimension. So how is what we're doing today affecting the billions and billions and eventually trillions of people to come very far down the line? Whoever wants to take it from there.
I have a lot to say, but it would be nice to hear Mason, and if TB has something too.
I think you're muted, Mason.
Yeah, sorry, I was saying that I would like to hear Tibi on this one.
Well, we're playing with the hot potato. Well, yes, and that's sort of going in direction of the direction of Immanuel Kant, which is generalizing. Okay, what this behavior, if applied in general, help be a good thing or not. So going from the specific to the more general, but this is going into dimensions of space and time. So it's I find that it's in the same affiliation of argumentation. That's nice. That's nice, and it's good to have some general principles and theories. Also, what I think is that sometimes these rules, they just emerge in context. Okay, so for example, if we're a bunch of people now doing something and trying to survive, the condition in which we are will most probably drive the norms that we set up for ourselves, and that is to optimize the way we do things to achieve our goals, and also to optimize the pleasure of doing it, maybe, or make it more easier. So what I'm trying to say here is that there is the work of theory, to set up these principles and guidelines, how to think about ethics in different conditions, and there is the emergent stuff. Okay, there is these norms that people put in place just because they need it in that particular context, and which is dealing with life and death and dealing with everyday activities. And so I believe that capitalism has created its own norms. Okay, so for instance, it is okay to be part of a company and kill the other company, economically speaking. It is okay, it is fine. It is fine to put other company out of business and have these people lose their jobs and the ability to feed their kids. That's just fine. Okay, it's a norm that is totally accepted within capitalism, competition. Okay, that is so because that's the way the system works and that's how we feed ourselves. So that is a norm that is emergent from this system that we have created to transform resources for to feed ourselves and continue with life. And any theoretician that thinks about ethics and the good and bad in society, the morals, would probably find that awful. But how can you go against that? Because that's how capitalism works. And if you take that out, you take competition out and you destroy the whole essence of capitalism, right? Same thing with private property. I can be sitting on a pile of food, and I decide how to distribute that, right? In any circumstance, even if everybody's starving around me, right? So then you see gated cities, gated communities. We have a lot of that in Brazil, which is totally justified by capitalism, right? So I don't think somebody has created these ethical norms for capital. I think they've just emerged and they're there, okay, and we try to cope with them. What is there that it's proper to peer-to-peer, So we can have these theories in ethics and say, okay, let's think like that. But, people on the ground doing stuff, they're going to be just trying to live day by day and achieve their goals. So I would shoot it to Maisam. What do you see in your research talking to peer-to-peer communities that is emerging as social norms that people adopt because, hey, it makes sense for our activities today and tomorrow. What I'm saying? Is this something qualitatively different from what you see in the corporate world, which is norms that are totally accepted?
Yes. And I would like to address the first point that Sam mentioned and you talked about, which is I do not feel that we can attribute what is good or what is ethical to one or two or three behaviors. To decide what is ethical or not, it is more related to a total general behavior. It's enough for me to seek X and Y. It's not enough for me not to do X and Y to be ethical or not. It is more of a total behavior from my part. And we're going to do a loop with, yes, like TB is saying, the way we organize, we govern, has the effect of inducing behavior from us in a very natural way. Capitalism, transaction cost theory, didn't aim to get us to a point, like TB is explaining, where it's perfectly ethical and legal for you to kill another company in capitalism. That wasn't the aim. What happened is the way they approached the government model allowed these things to grow, pushed humans to behave in a certain way. In the commons is different. The transparent environment, the honest environment, and the safe environment of expressing oneself. And this is a very core point. The commons allows for this free expression. And this new environment, this employees in the same company are limited to how much they can transfer data and information. It happens vertically and horizontally. In the commons, these boundaries go away. And when we see this new form of governance going around, what we also noticed, as Tibi was saying, a new way people are behaving to each other. I am automatically more honest. I know that if I want to work in a CBPP organization, I have to be open. It is built, it is the standard. You have to be open. You have to be comfortable with your own skin. You have to be able to respect other people, to appreciate other people. So yes, the Commons, Vinny, I know it's far from what you want. You're a passionate guy, man, and I feel that with you. And I love your spirituality. It's amazing. Yet I feel for us to get to that deep level that you were expressing throughout our beautiful meeting, there is a phase. And that phase is, let's observe a new way of governance called the Commons. Let us try to adapt it to an economic level. It's already hard to try to adapt it over there, but if we are able to see it nourish, to see it grow, if we are able to go back to your main word, nurture it, not try to structure it, yes, I do believe, like Tibi is saying, it will enhance the proper, total human behavior that we should seek as humans, which I consider to be ethical.
Yeah, I got you. I got you, Mason. I got you. But I want to go back to what Sam contextualized in a very beautiful manner and make some remarks. The first of one is that I read Peter's work on animal ethics about 25 or 30 years ago, so I don't remember it quite, but of course I have some let's say some memories of my reading, right? So I think that I wanted to say that as everyone, Peter was a being of its time, right? So when he was not only seeing, but he was foreseeing what became a very, I would say, a mass extinction level thing that we do with all sorts of species, animals in general, because it is a mass extinction event that we do when we industrialize our food, and we call it. We think that animals can be are fitted to be in the can, right? And or the plastic, they even worse. So this is a very disturbing thing. Why? Because if I'm talking here of, oh, come on, the next move is, the move that we have to make is to re-understand, reimagine, and restructure ourselves in a life-centric manner, right? All of these things that we're talking, all of the things that Sam described for us, it has to be considered, right? Not only considered, it has to be tackled with. And we really are not doing that work, right? We're really not really doing that. We're not tackling this in the profound manner that we need. And actually, we can't even speak about ethics in this sense because it's very hypercritical, because it's not, we're not being ethics. We're not being ethical, let me say. We're not being ethical in this sense. Not a bit, right? But I think that the move that we can make to be, because this is a very complex move, you see, TB. This is a very complex move. This is not something that we can plan, right? With UN, with the nation states, with all this structure that we have. We cannot plan this. We cannot put this in the Paris Accords. This is not. You see, this is something that we have to do in a very micro scale, in an interactive manner, because interaction changes people, right? Changes us and changes everything. And but we have to talk first about ethos. First, we have to talk about ethos. Then we can talk about ethics. Because you see, for me, ethics is a product of ethos, not the other words. Why I'm saying this? Because ethos is something that has the property to move, to change, to adapt, to rebirth, to die, or to rebirth again. Ethos has this property. I think that TB will remember, we were talking when we were doing the wealth transfer touchdown, right? We're talking about the nomad, digital nomad culture, right? And I was talking with you how they have their own ethos. And it's not only one, it's all sorts of ethos. So, and they construct their ethos, they construct the ethics between them. But the thing is that it's not a manifesto, right? Ethos is not a manifesto. And I would it's not a manifesto. I would argue, Mason, that ethos is a anti-manifesto move. Why? Because manifesto consolidates things. Manifesto is more akin to ideology, right? To ethos. So when we're talking about ethos, we're doing about what we're doing, what we are, is the thing about what you talk is what you walk, right? What you talk is what you walk. So when we're talking, walking, and interacting in a peer-to-peer fashion like we're doing, all of us here, we are really souring, we're being sours of new kinds of ethos. And we are souring in the sense that the way to nurture it is by doing that move that we talk as we start here our OOcast experience. You do the move to observe yourself and observe others, right? You do the move to observe, not to construct, not to make any type of extraction. You do the move to observe. So when we mutually access ourselves and mutually observe ourselves, when we do this moving, we are creating ethos, my friends. We are creating ethos. And when we create ethos, in low frequencies and high frequencies, it doesn't matter. But we're creating it. And this is behavior. This is culture. We're creating culture. When we create culture in this way, with this type of ethos, in a life-centric one, so we can talk about ethics. We can talk about normative ethics. We can talk about meta-ethics. We can talk about anything related to ethics. But ethics goes. And what I'm saying about Peter Senge, Sam, is that he was a being of his time. So he couldn't think nothing different that he thought and put it on paper in a very elegant way, in a very, not elegant, but very, very harsh and very strict to the bone way, to the bones, because he was thinking as the ethos of this background society that we still are, but is in the collapsing mode, right? So that's my take on it. That's what I was to give back to Sam.
Yeah, I mean, thank you so much. I want to share one note related to kind of both what TB and Mason were talking about in terms of kind of grounded applications, as well as what could be an example of kind of a stigmergetic emergence of a certain ethos in our capitalistic world and in our corporate world. And others might know more about this. I never want to mischaracterize, but it's the FACTIC network of cooperatives, of tech cooperatives in Argentina, where they have, from what I understand and from what I've read, essentially the way it works, it's a network of tech cooperatives. And when any of those cooperatives, discover new work opportunities that they don't necessarily have the capacity for, or that they would need help with, then they share that work opportunity with an email list of all of the other cooperatives in the group. And the ethos is whoever is most in need of the work at that time, they get the opportunity. And so I just wanted to share that as an example, kind of bridging and bringing to the ground, and it seems like it would be wonderful to learn about the history of that example, but that feels like it was probably a stigmergetic thing, where you had these different tech cooperatives and they were all kind of looking for work, and the work came and went, and they were probably friends with each other, and they saw peers across these places. And at some point they recognized, oh, we could do this together and we could be more resilient that way. And, how are we going to organize this? And what is our culture if we're going to take on this kind of network? And, the things just kind of came from the context. TB, to echo what you said, I love and I very much agree with the notion that a lot of this emerges from kind of unique contexts. And so I don't know if anybody wants to respond directly to that, or we could talk at some higher levels things before we wrap up.
Well, I just want to mention here that when we work with MySim in Sensorica in our project, sometimes we pause and analyze. Okay, so we analyze things, if you want to use traditional language, from a management perspective, from an economics perspective, and from ethos or ethics perspective. And very often, we see people's behavior in this context of open collaboration. So this is like very concrete, day by day ethics in context. Okay, it's not simulation, it's not fabulation, it's not imagination. We work with people in real projects, and then we pause and say, oh, did you see that guy, how he reacted to that message? Did you see how they did this kind of thing, right? And so our experience is very rich in this kind of experience of emergent norms. Just to bring it up a little bit, how it happens is like once you take away the formal relationship of collaboration and take away the dependency. When I work for a company, I have a contract, I work for them, they're obliged to pay me a salary, and I grow a dependence on them because they pay my groceries and my rent and my fun. So there is a high switching cost. If I want to drop that job and take another one, it's a risky business there, right? So I put up with it. So I create some dependency. Once you cut that away and you allow people to freely collaborate, all sorts of things happen, and you can see the emergence of a new ethos, because now there is no forced attachment. Somebody comes to contribute to the project today, they can leave tomorrow if they don't like anything, right? So people develop this sense of having these relationships nurtured in a way that it gets sticky, without a lock-in mechanism. Once you don't have a lock-in mechanism, you have a new dynamic and you have new norms that emerge. Okay, so you already see that somebody that would come in and start bossing people around, well, you can do that in an environment where that individual has no choice to be there. Okay, once that individual has the choice to go work with other people somewhere else, then you realize that bossing people around it doesn't work, right? So applying that type of pressure or applying some mechanism of control, it just doesn't work in this environment. And then you see people adapting to it. People start to understand the game. Okay, this is something different that I have experienced in a company, where I compete against my coworkers because I want a better job and a better salary, and I want to keep things for myself because I want to become a dependable employee. So they can't just kick me out whenever I want, and then I can leverage that to get ahead, right? So you see all these dynamics in a company. Well, you don't have that; that disappears. So then they're trying to understand that this is a different game. The game here is played differently. In order for me to have success, I need to share. I need to nurture relationships. I need to respect other people, right? So we see these new norms emerging in everyday life, and emerging in the sense that people don't have to read the norms on a document. They just They just get the norms by playing the game. That's how the game is played, right? That this is the dynamic that makes me go ahead in this context and makes everybody else around me go ahead, and we can go ahead as a group. Okay, and so they inherently there's this human capability of understanding social norms that make sense in a certain environment, and people reach the same conclusions. You kind of don't have to teach people these norms; they just get it. It's like the normal thing you do in this kind of environment, right? So we're seeing that in everyday life. It's good to codify when things get more complex, okay? But just to say that we do have this experience, and it's really interesting to live it day by day.
If I may to reaffirm TV's point, I had this picture in my head. Going into a company is similar to going into a house. As soon as you go into the front door, you have a desk to your right. Sorry, electricity. Yes, I live in a third world. So, you would go into a house, and to your right, you have a desk. That desk, you have a person waiting for you, so you give them papers, CV, to introduce yourself. This is the HR. And then, if that person likes you, they tell you to go to the other room to meet the manager you might work with. Now, if the manager likes you, they give you a desk with a job and to-do list. Now remember, you just entered the new house without meeting anyone but the people that you're supposed to. Let's take that in a peer-to-peer commons. The moment you get into the house, there is only one person that is welcoming you, and they're telling you this: welcome, we're happy to see you. That is a big difference. And then, this is the bigger point. In a peer-to-peer commons, you're telling that person entering the house, you see this house? All the rooms? Everything in it? Yes? Don't worry, man, it's all yours. Feel free. This is a very different concept. We are trained to expect, and we talked about this, and Tibi hits on it very much. People that come from the corporate world, there are expectations, there are assumptions. And the commons is able to remove those boundaries. To hit on Vinny's side of things, is removing those boundaries. And one aspect I would really add, because it was very important in my research, and I'm seeing in my experience in Sorica, the moment you tell people that they should not expect financial compensation, plays a very big role in determining the behavior of that person after that. Once you tell them that you should not expect any financial compensation for your work in a peer-to-peer concept, this is where the person is going to think maybe 2 or maximum 3 things. Okay, I love this, I want to try it. No, not at all. If there's no money, there's nothing for me in there. Or 3, let me try it and see, but I won't get any money back. The removal of the financial reward, or the displacement, because in our system the financial reward is front and central. The displacement of that financial reward to something less meaningful and increasing the incentive system in peer-to-peer plays a very big role in the arc of everything that Tibi was saying and we're experiencing in Sensorica.
Thank you so much. If anybody wants to respond, feel free to go after me. But just, I wanted to ask one last question, at least from my side. Others can intervene as they wish, which is, on the topic, on the theme, what brought us together is, ethics within the commons-based peer production movement, also in the context of lots of these regeneration efforts. Do you feel that there are any significant oversights that people are missing and people have a blind spot to that you would like to express for anybody?
Who's going to go first? Sam is always hitting us with those questions. Yes, thank you again for that beautiful question, Sam. And I will try to be very brief. The oversight, I think, is on our expectation as humans that people and systems are supposed to behave ethically. What I strongly believe that history and human behavior has taught us, when we expect people to behave ethically, when we expect people to build systems that work for the better of humanity as a whole, that is the biggest fundamental mistake we're doing. To go back to the paradox Vini mentioned before, they say they want to save the planet, they don't. It's because they don't want to. They're simply saying it because they know that's what they're supposed to say. We should expect and understand that we as humans have the natural tendency to destroy things. And when we establish that expectation, that's when our approach to solution becomes it becomes more real, and it becomes better. That was a weak word to end it, but there it is.
Well, let me put this in some few words so I will not spend more 15 minutes talking alone here. What I would say is that, oh my gosh, we are still evolving, folks. We're social animals, right? Cultural and social animals. We're still evolving. The babble of languages is still there, and language is a kind of code, right? So language encapsulates culture, language encapsulates worldviews, cosmogonies, and language is something that is very interesting to study, interesting to learn. It's like a universe in itself, right? And so I think that we have telepathic capabilities. I wouldn't say that we're going to evolve to, let's say, interact with ourselves via telepathic abilities, but we already do this, right? When TB just lay out his impressions with Mason's remarks about how people get it, how people get the ethos. This is something that is synesthetic, right? This is something this is a type of interaction. Is not language related, but we don't focus it. We don't look at it as something meaningful. This is something important to note. We just don't give a, forgive my words, we don't give a shit about our intuitions, right? And intuition is a very powerful peer-to-peer social technology, right? We tend to understand that the rational mind is the last thing in the evolution of our species. Of course not. It isn't. And it's part of it, but it isn't. So I would say that we can change our behavior by changing the matrix, consequently the ethos of the societies that we still are, even if now we're in the collapsing mode of these societies. Historically speaking, the best moment in our existence to do that. So we're really living, in this sense, a type of privileged time, right? And is it going to be something that certainly in that generational thinking, Sam, that you just shared with us related to the indigenous cultures and aboriginal cultures. The futures are very long future. We'll look to these times and say, wow, that was a pivotal moment in the existence of our species. And that's it. How do we really make the difference? Well, I would say that in a very non-typical way, that in the typical ways that we do it. A non-typical way and a typical way that we do is we are already doing that, right? We are already doing by not only expanding our awareness, not only by understanding that the big movement that we have to make is open ourselves to be accessible to everything, not to everyone, not only to everyone, is to understand that we have a lot of modes of interaction. There's not only language, like we're talking here, is to understand how complexity is the great driver of evolution. It's not systems. It's not systems thinking. Systems thinking is not a driver of evolution, like we heard a lot of social scientists say. It's not. It's complexity, right? And if you go to the minimal structures of complexity, we're talking about peer-to-peer relations, right? So if we understand that the great changes that we can make as civilizations is not to construct a new hyperstructure, is not to construct a macro narrative, a new macro narrative like singularity. You see, I see this macro narratives that arose in the second decade of this century, like, the new thing now is collaborative economy. Oh, really, man? Yeah, collaborative economy is the new thing, right? And you heard, no, Ray Kurzweil, always the singularity. We are in the singularity period. Now we're going to merge AI and AGI with everything. We're going to become this interplanetary species with cyborgs and Star Trek and things like that. Well, that's not it. That's just a narrative, right? And we all have the capability to co-create. That's the word. We have to access ourselves and to co-create micro-narratives capable of creating new ethos that will generate new ethics, right? And we can do this in a very life-centric way. We don't need to change, you see, Mason, we don't need to change the actual structures because they are already collapsing, institutionally speaking. We just need to move in between them, talking with the human that are behind them, right? Talking with people that sustain them, because you see, these structures, institutions and organizations and corporates, they are not entities, right? They are not monsters or Frankensteins. Oh, well, there are Frankensteins, right? Really, but what I'm saying is that we can really net weave in between us in a very global horizon new ethos, right? Related to a life-centric and symbiotic, stigmatic way. And we don't have to reinvent the wheel to do that. We really don't have to reinvent the wheel, right? We don't have... What I'm saying is that this is already happening. You see, the very example of utopia is when I said that utopia is a cultural DAO. What I mean about that is a social cultural DAO. Is a lot of people that are related to utopia, is not a lot, but it will be a lot of people, that they are aggregating their point of views, their perspectives, their peer-to-peer generating micro-narratives and creating new ethos, life-centric, driven, right? So this utopia is not utopia, right? So it's already happening in this sense. And same thing I can say about Tao Dao, but we're not going to talk about Tao Dao today, but TB knows why I'm talking here. So it's we can do this, and I think that Sensorica is doing too, but is doing in a very I don't know. I may be wrong. I don't have sufficient knowledge about the daily business of daily day and daily business of Sensorica, but I know that our communities of practice, right? And if our communities of practice, well, let this community practice without having rehearsals or without having a lot of ruling or I don't know. Let it go. Right, I think that is already happening. What TB just have been showing and sharing with me, but that's my take. I don't know, Sam, that I directly respond to you, give you the feedback, but that's my take on it.
What wonderful!
Yep,
Thank you so much.
I
TB,
also
go ahead.
I also bounce off quickly because I think your question is very important. What are the missing viewpoints or like a dead angle for people, because we're also discussing, but some people will listen to this conversation, make it more valuable for them. I think one of the problems that I see with people setting up organizations and experimenting with new type of organizations, communities, networks, more or less open and more or less transparent, something towards peer-to-peer, commons-based peer production. One of the problems that I sense is that they come at the beginning with the question, what governance should we adopt? And why do I bring governance here? Because governance is built on an ethos. Okay, you can't have rules of the game being built in abstraction of any ethos, right? When we build structures, you have to have an ethos foundation to build the governance on top of it. These are rules, and you build a different type of rules on top of them. But the question, what kind of governance we should adopt, when I see this question, I say that's nonsense. That's a nonsense. You can't just go on a shopping and pull a governance out of a shelf and just apply it to your organization. Organization is a living thing. So going back to this emergence, right? So that's one dead angle to say governance is not something that you just import from somewhere and implement in an organization. Okay, there's got to be a movement within to these rules, these norms. They should be incarnated, integrated. They're not just stuff on a piece of paper. Otherwise, they're not operational. They don't mean anything. People don't go read papers. So there has to be something that is incarnated, meaning in your skin, under your skin. The other thing is, when people ask this question, they see themselves as part of an organization, which is a box, as a finite group of individuals. And that's how we see the world. That's how people are conditioned to see the world. And going back to Vinny's fluidity, I still need to explore that. But what transpires for me here is this, the mycelium. It's this new thing, this new social structure that has no boundaries, no beginning, no end, and is constantly shifting and adapting. Right, that now cripples in between the cracks of the system, okay, as these structures crumble and deal with their own problems. So this kind of institutions becomes more penetrable, and individuals form these peer-to-peer relationships in between these cracks. So when we think about we have a peer-to-peer network and we call it Sensorica and we have our own governance. We're thinking institutionally, and we're creating an identity, okay? And we freeze that thing, but the new age is and I don't want to go into another one of these narratives, but if there is a shift, it is towards something that is more network and more fluid. So Sensoricans, people that are within this context of interaction, they naturally connect with Tao Dao and with other organizations. That's how I met with Vinny, and we exchange, right? Is the thing that if we think institutionally and say this is Sensorica and put a name there on the wall and say, and we have this governance, boom, and we screw that on the wall too, that becomes barriers for interactions. You see what I'm saying? Oh, we are an organization and our governance is sociocracy. Bang. Then what you're telling me as a Sensorican is, well, we can't really interface together because we have set our minds on this particular way of functioning that we read in a book, and that makes us a closed group. You know what I'm saying? So how do we think about ethos and governance? How do we think about these norms that are not creating tribes, that are not, you see what I'm saying, that are not instigating the creation of tribes and identities, closed identities? So when you think about these social norms, I think we have to put ourselves, and that's a blind spot. We have to put ourselves in this framework of networks, of how can us, me, and these guys that I interact with every day can be open to create some flows with other people in other contexts. You see what I'm saying? And going back to this local idea, I think in this discussion, I think we put a bunch of things on the table that are interconnected, that can form a sort of a coherence. You know what I'm saying? And let's not apply too much rationality, because there is a movement, people can Google it, of post-rationality, which is a new evolution of the human species. And first, it starts with the observation that rationality is failing in many instances, and in some instances is failing badly, and it costs us as human beings a lot. So we're just these animals with some brain optimized by an evolutionary process on this dimension on Earth, but we're not omniscient. We're far from being able to understand everything around us, and rationality is very optimized to deal with our own life, but it's not. Our brain is not designed to understand the universe. Let's put it that way. It's just optimized to live within our own niche. So rationality is not the ultimate thing. It would be anthropocentric to believe that our rationality can help us understand the universe. Is like saying we're gods, or we're made in the image of God to understand everything, right? That's an anthropocentrism. So we should abandon that and think that rationality is a tool that fails like any other tool. And so if we try to engineer the world, we will fail. So there is this complexity, So think in terms of networks and connections and interconnectivity and flows, and not in terms of institutions that are closed and with identity. And let the stuff emerge. Let these norms emerge in this context, and not structure but nurture. Right, back to these ideas. I sense that there is coherence in what came from everybody. And I'm amazed.
I totally agree with that. We're not as far as we might think. We're actually much closer.
Yeah, I mean, that's amazing, everybody. And I guess at this point, I would just leave the floor if there's anything that anybody else wants to share or add. And I would pass the baton in general. That's my contribution to this micro-narrative and ethos, is like I'm abandoning any pretense of like structure on what happens in this conversation. And I mute myself.
I would like to say thank you for this beautiful experience. Looking forward for more talks.
Yeah, the same thing here, and we end up not doing that different question between each other, but that's okay, because I think that we explore very fresh territory here, or meta territory, I would say. And was very nice to have this OOcast experience with you guys, and I think that we craft. Let's say, I don't know if the word is craft because it's very. Yes, it's more human-like. We craft some insights here, very very interesting insights, and I'm very very pleased about it. And that's it, TB. If you want to end up as a co-host, because Sam is just emerging from the temporary host that he became during this OOcast experience. So feel free, and we can end this up.
He's actually a very good host. I thought this was his thing.
Yeah, well, thanks Sam for your questions, for guiding this. Thanks Mason for your time. You put in this. Thanks Vinny. I think I like the composition of this thing. I learned something, so it's a good ground to build on top. Let's see what other things can come out of it.